Today marks the 4th episode of my special 5-part series interviewing Masters of Wine. Today featuring Mick O'Connell, MW. He tells us his origin story, weaving together his experience in the wine industry into his current project, making wine in Sardinia. Throughout, touching on trials and tribulations, both in the MW process and in the winemaking process. Before we get to try his Garnacha, not Guerra 2015. Enjoy.
So I'm Mick O'Connell, and I'm based in Dublin, and I'm over here in London for the day, basically selling our wine, which is my brother-in-law and I. We make a wine in Sardinia. We're here in Hanford Wines, where I used to work, and this is a very formative part of my wine journey, if you will. So, I would have started in the wine trade in Dublin while I was in university, so back in 2001, and worked in a wine shop. And if I'm being totally honest, wine was just another drink. It wasn't something that I had real passion for at the time. The place that I worked, McHugh's, was an amazing kind of off-license, but world beers, what has become craft beers. They're a real specialist in world beers, and that would have been the thing that was the passion at the time. But again, this is when I'm 18, 19, so I moved to London in 2005 with 3 other guys, and the 4 of us had very big dreams of becoming rock stars. We played in a band and hoped that was going to be our career, so where better to move than London? So while we were doing the band as our kind of in our head, our main thing, I would have been working in Oddbins. And Oddbins was a brilliant place to work back then. I've spoken to so many people who would say, Mick, you got in at the end of the good times, but it was brilliant. So in 2005, I would have been working in Oddbins in Great Portland Street, Wardour Street in Soho, and it was just a fantastic place to work in terms of the people who you were around. When we were it was interesting, in Wardour Street, there was an actor, a screenwriter, 2 photographers, and a musician. That was our 5 staff. It was just such a creative environment to be in. It was brilliant fun. And to be honest, Oddbins was the place where I really kind of got the wine bug, as it were. And actually some of that was down to, I kind of knew that I needed to study if I wanted to become a manager or whatever within Oddbins. And really, I needed to become a manager to sustain some sort of life. I mean, working kind of part-time or 0 hours just wasn't feasible for living in London at the time. You really needed to be on a kind of assistant manager's or a manager's wage just to live and just to be able to pay your rent, basically. But really got the bug there, and would have done all the kind of WSET training and all of those things 05, 06, 07, and kept jumping around stores. But it was really then that I got the bug. And I guess doing that kind of study made me realize that I wanted to keep studying wine. That was the thing. And look, there are flaws to any sort of wine education, definitely. But one thing that it definitely does allow you to do, so doing the WSET allows you to kind of speak the language of wine. And if you're able to speak the language of wine, then you're really able to get into the interesting stuff about wine, which is speaking to the people behind a wine, or the people who market a wine or in wine business. But being able to talk the wine language, which is what you learn at WSET, you're able to converse to them on a level that you'll understand what they're saying, and that's when you get to hear the stories that people have. That to me was the really fascinating part. And, I suppose I would have finished my kind of WSET diploma and stuff like that around 2010. And that was around the time that Oddbins was going through its bad phase, and it had gone through a couple of different ownerships, but it was going under. And I was very, very lucky that Mark Andrew, who's of Noble Rot, but at the time was at Roberson's, who was a pal of mine through Ali, a joint friend. He had recommended me here to the guys at Hanford Wines, and I'd be ever grateful for that, because not only did it get me a job when I was about to be laid off, but it got me this job. And I can only speak highly about Handford. I mean, such an amazing range of wines, such a great experience, buying from hundreds of different importers, access to tasting things. And, I always knew that I kind of wanted to keep on studying, but also being around James and Greg, who are two masters of wine, that definitely made me want to become a master of wine even more, or at the very least, I suppose, I wanted to undertake the journey. I guess you're a bit mad if you think you're going to pass the exams, because generally speaking, you don't pass the exams. You're a very lucky person if you do tend to pass the exams. It's still, the pass rate is something like 10 or 12 or 15%. So I was lucky. So being here at Handford was around some of the great wines of the world, tasting some of the great wines of the world, working with brilliant people. So, and then took this journey of the Master of Wine, and started that in, I think the school year was 2012, like September 2012, but the first thing was January 2013. And that, it's a very, very different level of study than what you're doing with the WSET or whatever, where I guess the WSET part is pretty prescriptive in some ways, in terms of, again, for me, it's like you're learning a language, so you need to know your past tense and your future tense, or else you can't speak the language properly. So there is a bit of, with the WSET, actually, Mick, you're wrong, that is incorrect. And with something as personal as wine, I don't really think that that's correct. You can never be wrong with wine. You like it, you don't. The acid might be high or the acid might be low, but is that relevant to the overall picture? And I guess the exciting thing always for me about studying the MW was it was always about the overall picture. That was the exciting thing. And me, from my way of learning, I was never able for this kind of flashcards style learning. That's just not my way. I am so envious of people who can do that. I think it's amazing, but I'm not. I can't learn things and regurgitate them. If I don't understand something, then it'll never stay in my brain. It'll never go into my brain. So for me, what I really needed to do was just visit people, and I spent, I guess, kind of the first 2 or 3 years while I was studying, so say 2013, 2014, 2015, just visiting as many producers as I could, mainly in Europe, because we're here in Europe. Also, London is... You kind of only realise this when you move out of London. I've moved back to Dublin since. But when you're in a place like London, the access we have in London to just getting on a plane and being in a cool wine producing region in 2 hours, I remember one particular trip where I had 2 days off, and I got up and got a horrible o'clock Ryanair flight out of Stansted to southern Barcelona, what's it called? Barcelona Reyes. And was in Priorat from Reyes half an hour later. Only place I've ever got a speeding ticket, because I had jam-packed my schedule so bad that I was like flying around all the bendy roads in Priorat trying to get from place to place. But visiting people, and I saw 5 people, jumped back in the car, stayed in the airport, went from that airport the following day to Porto, and from Porto visited some great friends in Graham's and in Taylor's, and had spent an entire afternoon learning about these things and talking to people. And like that was always my way of studying, asking people difficult questions. What do you do if something has gone wrong? It's a really interesting thing to hear someone's response to that. So I guess during all that time of studying, long-time wine student at that time, and one of the dreams that everybody in my side of the trade, so my side of the trade has always been selling wine. And I guess at some point people, they think, I'd love to create a wine, I'd love to make a wine myself, or you probably think to yourself, I wonder, can I make a wine? I'm very lucky. My wife is from Sardinia. Sardinia is a place where grape growing is not a difficult thing if you compare it to some of the cooler climate places in the world. I mean, bringing grapes to ripeness, I should say, is a pretty easy thing. Maybe getting amazing quality fruit is a different thing. But so yeah, I'm very lucky with that. I would have helped my wife's uncles and things like that harvesting and making wine over the years. And in 2015, we were kind of saying to ourselves, let's give this a bash. We'll give it a go. And so we bought some fruit from the gentleman Paolo who owns the local ice cream parlor. It's classic in Sardinia. It's like this in a lot of European places where nobody really can make money from growing grapes, so people have this as a kind of side idea, and so everybody that we're buying fruit from has something else that they do, but in 2015 bought some grapes from Paolo, and like we're talking 500 kilos, 360 bottles we made in 2015, and that became the wine, I guess, that we've kept on going with, and it's called Garnacha, not guerra. And I guess, for me, one of the important things always was, I'm not a winemaker. I don't have a winemaking degree. I don't come from a winemaking background. To be perfectly honest, I don't even come from a family that are that interested in wine other than drinking it. But so for us it was very important to get a kind of, I guess, a philosophy around what we wanted to do. And this at the time is kind of me and my wife. And she was brilliant. She was super, super supportive the whole time, because basically I'm going there and spending our holidays there doing wine as opposed to going to the beach and seeing family and all of these things. So she was amazing. But I suppose the philosophy was the most important thing with this project. And really at the time in 2015 and still to this day, the wines that I like to drink the most are kind of tart, bright, crisp reds. Lighter and brighter is always what I like to drink. And I was out with Nathan from Arnott Roberts in California last week, and he was saying, it's amazing that if you go to a party, if you look at magnums at the end of a night, the only magnums that are ever finished are always like Beaujolais, Jura, bright Cab Francs from the Loire or something. So, and when he said that, I was going to go, that is so true. If you have a magnum of a really big Chateauneuf de Pape or an old school Bordeaux, people love to have a glass, but do you want to drink an entire bottle or an entire magnum? Maybe not. So I guess we set out really to do this style of wine that was this tart, light, bright, kind of crisp style of red wine. And I suppose for a while I hadn't thought it may be possible in Sardinia to make that style of wine. And actually I was very lucky through my day job tasting with loads of people, but again also through my study having conversations with loads of people. So two people that were really important for my realization that I could make a wine like this were Tom Shawbrook and then Dominic Huber from Terroir Limit. And so with Tom, I remember just discussing with the guys, and I'm tasting these really bright, juicy styles of wine. And, I'm saying to him, so when did you harvest? And he's going, oh, we harvested here. And I'm going, hold on, but that's for Tom, that's the equivalent of harvesting at the beginning of August for us. And he's going, yeah. And, then this is where the problem with theoretical wine learning comes. So in the back of my head, I'm going, yeah, but the wine should be green if you're picking at the beginning of August. And Tom's kind of looking at me going, no, dude, taste it. So I'm tasting it and the wine tastes amazing. So I'm going, I can feel the wheels in motion in my brain. And then similar with Dominic talking about Terroir Limit, and they're just such pure, bright, delicious wines. And a similar thing, he picks in Priorat kind of end of August, maybe 1st, 2nd of September. And I'm going, God, if Priorat can do it, then so can Sardinia. So, we started thinking we could make a wine in this style. And, I guess you always have this thing, certainly when you're starting doing a wine project, where you're thinking to yourself, look, if nobody is interested in this, as long as it's a style that I want to drink, at least we can drink it, And certainly in 2015, the idea, we did 360 bottles total. That is something that we could have drank had no one else got the idea, if you know what I mean. So we made in 2015 360 bottles, and tasted it with a couple of people here. The guys in Handford loved it. Tasted it with my pal Ben from Carte Blanche Wines, who is our importer here. He loved it as well, and Ben is great as well. He also loves the idea of working with his friends, and you know, it's a really important thing. Wine is one of those things where there are so many great wines in the world that you can choose who you work with. You can work with great wines that are made by great people, or you can work with great wines that are made by shits. And like, you know, it is a really important thing for a lot of people to just be happy in their day job. And wine is one of those things where you can choose wine that you find delicious, but that you also love the people behind it. So I think Ben he's been brilliant for us, and you know, we've got the wine now in various restaurants around town, and like it's up in Scotland, and you know, a little bit in Sardinia, but we have it in a restaurant in Champagne, through Alberto, who used to work at Faro, which was one of the first places that listed it. You know, so it's been one of these things where, from our perspective, it's been amazingly successful, given the kind of humble idea at the beginning. And again, when you talk about amazingly successful, I mean, realistically, we're not making any wine, really. You know, we're not making any numbers, so therefore we're certainly not making any money. We actually, I always say to people, we basically currently lose €1 per bottle, but that's business. You know, if you're starting any business, there's a formative period where you have to put time and energy into building something, and that's going to come at a loss for a while. And I guess the problem with winemaking is that you only do it once a year, if you see what I mean. So maybe it's a little bit longer than, say, opening a restaurant. You'd expect if you open a restaurant to probably, say, lose money for the first 2 or 3 months and then slowly start to make money. And I guess for us, we're kind of going, we'll have to lose money for the first 2 or 3 vintages, which just happens to take a little bit longer. But so that was the 2015, and again, you know, it was a proper garagiste wine, literally, in that it was literally made in a garage, you know, a place where people park their cars normally. So style wise, you know, I always wanted to make, I don't like necessarily the term natural wine, but we certainly wanted a very, very minimal intervention wine. We wanted to see how we could use as little sulfur as possible, for example. And like, SO2 is a great thing, but we just didn't want to add too much of anything. So I suppose there's a knock-on advantage of doing what we're doing, picking really early, is that the acid is high, pH is naturally low, so there's a little bit of a kind of more natural stability there. So we're quite lucky that, I guess, the style of wine that we like to drink happens to be something that you can make slightly more naturally, or with less intervention. So that's been great. And particularly when we're literally making the wine in a garage for the first couple of vintages. The next 2 vintages, we have a corner of a winery, so that's obviously a bit easier to clean, etc. But you know, when you are doing something in a winery, you have to be so anal about being clean, and that natural stability is really welcomed, you know, genuinely welcomed. And then that was the 2015. We sold, you know, 360 bottles, a little bit in Ireland, mainly here in London. I would have, in 2016, myself and my wife, we decided with our daughter we would bring our daughter back and kind of raise her in Dublin. That was a very big decision for us to make on a personal level. You know, it's one of those things where, professionally speaking, London is one of the wine hubs of the world. It feels difficult to leave that. And also we would have been leaving our group of friends we were here for 12 years. So that was a big decision to move back, but really the idea was we wanted to raise our daughter closer to family and somewhere that I guess we were more familiar with the education system or whatever. Sardinia was an option. But I guess we decided to move from London to Dublin so it wouldn't be such a big step. You know, going from a city of, say, 10 million people like London to a city of 1 million people like Dublin probably isn't the biggest thing. But if we were to go from 10 million London to 10,000 village in Sardinia, that probably would have felt like a bit of a change. We moved back in 2016, and that coincided with me passing the Master of Wine, which was great. We kind of made the decision decision before we knew that was going to happen. And yeah, I got through, would have graduated in November of 2016 with the MW, and that would have been 2 months after we had done our second vintage, 2016, of Garnacha Guerra. And for 2016, my brother-in-law came on, this was brilliant, because my brother-in-law had been here in London as well, and he decided also to move back to Sardinia, where he sees himself staying. He's younger than I am, and he really had the wine bug. He used to work for Berkman Wines here, but saw what I was doing with my wife in 2015, loved the whole idea of it. I kind of always had an inkling I could convince him to come on. So from day one, the bottle always said Mick O'Connell, Canchetta being my wife's name, and I was always hoping that we could become a kind of a family business, and it's so important as well. We hope this can be Gianluca's job going forward, but I was absolutely delighted that he came on in 2016, and he's so passionate about the whole thing, so passionate in fact that he has gone back to college and is studying winemaking, which is brilliant. So neither of us in 2015 were winemakers. Yes, we had read lots of books about winemaking and spoken to lots of winemakers, but now we have someone who actually knows how to do the stuff. I mean, I don't know one end of a press or one end of a pump from each other, and I suppose that feeds into the very, very traditional way that we've made the wine. I mean, it's in plastic tubs, it's open top ferment, there's no destemming, it's foot trodden, it's properly old school stuff. It's the kind of stuff that you don't need any equipment to do. But that's not to say that we're kind of opposed to that. For this particular wine, it suits the style. I hope with time, and if we were able to get our own winery, then maybe we'd be able to make a couple of different wines and we'd just experiment. And that would be the plan longer term. But yeah, Gianluca came on in 2016, and that was the single best thing that has happened to the wine so far. And I had moved to Dublin, which is a little bit less easy to travel back and forth to Sardinia as well. So say in 2015, I'd been over and back flying kind of every month, checking on things. And now Gianluca's there all the time. That is Gianluca's part of the job. And I guess my role now is much more, I'm there for harvest, I'm there for pruning if required, and we go and we make all the decisions. But it's do you remember the band The Postal Service? They were called the Postal Service because they were based in two different parts of the world, and they used to send kind of demos to each other, and they would each add their bit. So someone would add a vocal line, and then someone would add a guitar line, etc. And some of the Garnacha Guerra project feels a little bit like that now, where Gianluca will go and he'll taste the wine and he'll go, I really like how it's tasting. We'll literally pour off a sample into a bottle, stick it in the post to me. I taste it a couple of days later. I go, oh yeah, I like that, but maybe we should give it a racking, or maybe now is the time we should add a bit of SO2, or and it's one of those things where I don't need to be there to be part of the decisions, which is brilliant.
Sorry, I'll just to throw something in there. I don't know the Postal Service, but you actually reminded me of another group that I know. They're called the Foreign Exchange. One in Amsterdam, I believe, another in the States. Cool. They never even met. They used to. So one was a producer, the other one was, part of a, very successful hip hop group doing the vocals, and they met online. They used to, send these things together. And their first album they did without ever meeting. Amazing. They now kind of go on tour together, and really good group. Look them up if you get the chance.
Yeah, must do. Yeah. No, but that's it's super cool, and I suppose in some ways you're kind of saying to yourself, look, this is the beauty of the modern world, globalization, email, all of these kind of things. We are definitely more connected, to use probably one of the social media companies' phrases, but we really are, and being able to do this, I can drop him a text, he drops me a text, and like things just happen so easily, and it just means that we don't need to spend the same sort of money on airfare and all of those kind of things. Realistically, look, my day job, I work as a buyer for an importer in Ireland, and my day job, I do a lot of traveling to wine fairs around Europe to see our producers. And if I'm being honest, quite often I don't want to spend my time off getting on a plane and going, So it's brilliant to be able to have the wine come to me in kind of... It can be a bit funny though, receiving a sample in very wet Ireland that has come from very sunny Sardinia, that can be a bit jarring sometimes. But no, it's been fantastic. But him being there to basically look after the wine all the time and take decisions immediately if they need to be took. So that's been the best thing that has happened. And again, now with his studies, he can do all of the technical kind of stuff. We often have these philosophical conversations about it's great that you know how to do all the technical stuff, but it's also so important to kind of have it there, but forget it in one sense, because the last thing that you want is to be making wine by a recipe. That really is totally the opposite end of the spectrum to where we want to be. And, to be honest, style-wise, this wine kind of came about because we were doing the opposite to what everybody else in Sardinia was doing at the time. Now, some of that has since changed. There's some quirkier producers coming out now from Sardinia who are doing really interesting things. But to be honest, like I would have started visiting Sardinia maybe, I don't know, roughly kind of 2009, 2010. And I was doing that thing that a lot of wine geeks would do, where I would go to a wine shop and buy the best local wine, but always their best cuvee, the stuff that you think is to be aged, and I'd bring it back to London and stick it in the wine rack. There's a classic thing of us wine collectory type people where we love buying wine but sometimes don't even drink it. I just love owning the bottle. But I remember then, say 5 years later, roughly before we started doing all of these things, those conversations with Tom Shobrook would have happened around the same time that I'm tasting these wines that are supposed to be the best wines from Sardinia 5 years on. And for me, a fine wine, a great wine, should be able to last 5 years, no problem. And there was a lot of wines that just tasted flat, and these are people who are using a lot of new oak. They're people who are picking very late, so there's that kind of sur maturity. The grapes are overripe, being honest, and that to me just isn't really how I like to drink. So we were trying to do the opposite, and I hope that comes through in the style, but the main decision obviously to try and avoid that is picking earlier, and that's effectively the one thing that we could really control. But the guys down there think we're nuts. They think we're absolutely mad. We're going out and picking the grapes where other wineries are still on holidays. Really, the first time the local guys would have tasted our wine, they'd be saying, "Questo non è un Cannonau vero." It's not a real Cannonau, and we're kind of going, "Yeah, but you know what? That's the point." No, but really, it's like, good. If you think it's not like your wine, that's exactly what we want. Thank you. That's the compliment, Okay. And so yeah, he came on 2016 doing the winemaking, but really we want to avoid that recipe winemaking.
One question really before that, because that really I think brings up a really interesting image in my mind. You're going against however many hundreds, I guess, years of tradition, and I guess being frowned upon and being sort of called the crazy ones, and that's not real wine, and I can just imagine all the rest of it. And to my mind, the word that comes to mind is disruption, because I think disruption comes in many, many different forms. I guess just fairly briefly, I'm just wondering like what is happening with all those other wines in Sardinia, the ones that are made in that classic style that are the real wines. What's happening to them? Where are they being drunk? How are they being valued, and what sort of price are they commanding?
It's a really great question, because realistically in that area, like, it is disruption in one sense what we're doing, but actually we're just lucky in one sense as well to come into wine producing when we have come into it. And like people that have generations and generations and generations behind them, you know, that weight of heritage and legacy on, I can just imagine if my own father was kind of making wine, I would want to do it like he had done it. And you have to remember that it's not too long ago, it's only a couple of generations ago, that even in a hot place like Sardinia, they would have been struggling to get grapes to ripeness. And, you know, with kind of modern viticulture and modern everything, we are much more able to do that easily. I mean, we can get flavor ripeness, sugar ripeness way more easy than we could 2 generations ago. And that goes for pretty much everywhere in the world of wine. So in one sense, they're doing it because that's the way that they've done it. And we're doing it from a different perspective. We're kind of saying we like this to taste this way, so we're trying to make a wine that tastes that way, while trying our best to reflect the site. So we're not there's no additions, etc., etc. So we're basically saying, if you buy a bottle of Garnacha guerra, you're tasting fruit from these 2 sites on these 2 pick dates at any given time. So in answer to your question about the kind of more traditional wines, where are they being sold? They're still sold kind of all over Europe. In terms of the price that they command, they tend to be relatively expensive. I mean, if you go to Sardinia and drink wine, if you buy a bottle of wine in the supermarket, it's probably €5. But that same €5 bottle here on a shelf in the UK is probably £15 when you put in duty and kind of shipping. It's a little bit more difficult to ship from Sardinia because there's an extra ferry journey, basically. So it is understandable that the wines are a little bit more expensive. But I suppose the thing that you should always have in the back of your mind with Sardinia is people do go there on holidays. So they have this thing of, I like Sardinian wine, or, you know, they come back with this positive experience of, we had an amazing time there, we drank some cool wine, and then they bring it back. And, you know, I think sometimes the wines, they come back to the UK and they taste the wines here and they're probably like, it was more fun there. But like, where is that not the case? You know, when you're drinking with stress off, you know? The other thing, they do create, like, kind of conventional wineries do a lot of Vermentino over there, and Vermentino is one of those delicious wines. If it's in a nice bucket and it's summertime, that is just it's so fun, you know. It's a fun wine. Sadly, when you come back to more northern Europe, it probably isn't the same type of fun. But have those wineries changed? The clever ones have over the last decade or two. But like anywhere, you know, you talk to people in Burgundy and Bordeaux, their pick dates will have come forward, and that is, you talk to people in Germany who'll now say, you know, we used to pick on trying to get it as ripe as possible. Now we're trying to pick, kind of restrain it, because we're losing acidity on Riesling, you know. So it's, you know, it's crazy, but that is the result of global warming and climate change. So yeah, definitely even those guys in Sardinia are pulling things forward. So they are more, they're having to be more, make wines that are more restrained, shall we say. What's interesting, you know, in 2017, so we have a 2016 here in front of us, but 2017 vintage is really hot, really dry vintage. And, you know, I have a little personal bias towards the kind of cooler, brighter, fresher vintages. So 2016 to me is perfect. 2018 was kind of cold and wet by Sardinian standards. And so I've got a soft spot for those vintage. And, you know, I know it's a personal bias. I've already tasted the 17 with colleagues who are like, dude, this is way better than the 16. I'm going, no, it's not. What are you talking about? 16 is my baby. But that vintage in 17, you know, we were picking on, try and get this right, but I think August 28 and 31st, but it might have been 27 and 29, something like that. End of August anyway, we're picking, and we're already having to sort out raisined fruit. And just to put that, you know, to kind of think about that, the year previously we were kind of looking for the ripest bunches on a vine. So just to put it in perspective, we're like a kind of micro negociant. We buy fruit. We do have a lease on a vineyard, but realistically that doesn't always go into our wine. So we buy fruit from people who have vines in different part of mainly northeastern Sardinia. One of the guys we buy fruit from is Renato, who owns the Remedy Bar in Fitzrovia, his dad, you know, and it's one of those amazing things that if you're in the wine scene and you know Sardinia, you know, all of a sudden you know everybody from Sardinia, you know, it's brilliant. It's an amazing thing. And Renato's dad's fruit is absolutely amazing, really brilliant fruit. So he's in Orgozolo, but, you know, 17, we're sorting out raisin fruit because that's the last thing we want to go in to create this kind of crisp tart style. 2016, 2015, 2018, we're basically looking for the ripest fruit on the vines, you know. So it's just, I suppose, again, look, we're only doing this for a few years. If you've had a career of wine growing or grape growing behind you, you see these changes all the time, but this is our first experience of it, and it's crazy to my mind, to be picking super early and still having to sort out kind of overripe fruit. So in 2017, just as an example, for the conventional guys, they would have been picking a lot closer to us in that vintage than in other vintages. So taking 2018, I often say if you split the 2017 and the 2018 vintage in half, you'd get the perfect vintage. 2017 too hot, too dry. 2018 too cool, too wet. But, you know, we were still picking at the same time, end of August, beginning of September, for the 2018 vintage, where other people would be picking in October. Gotcha. So I suppose one of the things that we look at, we're kind of, what we're doing with this wine is effectively taking out one variable, and that's the pick date. And like, you can argue either way with that, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, sure. You know, whether the fruit will be better or worse. But this is just a particular cuvee that we make a small amount of wine from. And for us, it's just, we take out one variable, which is pick date. So basically, we'll pick 2 or 3 days either side of September 1st every year. That's the idea. Okay.
It's high time we had a little look inside the glass here. And yeah, all of that. It was really interesting to hear that story, you know, in so much detail, with so much passion, and then see how that turns up. So yeah, over to you back again. Take us inside the glass.
Thank you. So I guess just before we get into the glass, the one thing that people often kind of ask me about is the label, why we've called it Garnacha, not guerra. And realistically, this is a Cannonau. It's made from DOC Cannonau di Sardegna fruit. But always, I guess, when we were trying to kind of disrupt or rally against what other people are doing, it was never important for us to be called Cannonau di Sardegna. While we're very proud of this wine coming from Sardinia, we're doing a very different thing to other people that would be representative of the DOC. So we always said, look, we're going to declare as Vino di Tavola. I was a little bit cheeky in the first couple of years that we made it, and when you're declaring as Vino di Tavola, you're not supposed to put a vintage on the label. You're allowed to put an international grape variety on the label, but you can't use a synonym of one of the DOCs. So I was saying in the first couple of years, we're putting Garnacha on it because Garnacha is an international grape variety, but we're not, you know, we're not calling it Cannonau, we're calling it an international grape variety. In the last 2 years, since we've moved into the corner of a winery, we've had to be a little bit more or a little bit less bold with our labeling, and we've had to take off the word Garnacha, which is a shame for us, because really the Garnacha idea was always a nod to the people who are doing Grenache in the center of Spain, you know, Gredos and these regions, and these are the kind of places that we just love Grenache from these places. The wines are fantastic. People like Danny Landy, the guys from Fideos de Couto, have just done one, and it's amazing wine. Like, and the density that they can get in their wines with the purity, that's something we can only really be jealous of in Sardinia until we find better sites, and we will do that over time. But yeah, so that's why we kind of called it Garnacha not guerra. But there's also a link to Orgozolo, where Renato from the Remedy he's from. There's a piece of Orgozolo is known for this kind of graffiti on the walls, and there's a piece of graffiti that says "Concimi non proiettili," and again, I can't even say the second word, but it basically means compost, not bullets. And I just loved this idea, compost, not bullets. How fantastic, you know, this is brilliant. But because I couldn't say the second word, we had to try and get something that was similar, and we were able to get this kind of link with Garnacha and Cannonau. So it's basically Grenache, not war.
Yeah.
That was the idea.
Yeah,
But compost, not bullets is really where it came from. So yeah, we've had to change the label since, but look, the style has stayed the same. And style-wise, I hope what you'll taste and smell now is this kind of floral, pretty style of wine. And that is always what we've gone for. You'll see with the colour is always really pale. We do a very, very short maceration on skins. Some of the reasoning behind that is a practical level, because we don't destem the fruit. We don't want, once the alcohol has come up in the fermentation, we don't want the alcohol to kind of strip from the stems any of the kind of hardness. We want the wines to be accessible, to be kind of pretty, to be drank young when possible. We want them to be vibrant, that's the whole point. So I guess in our minds we were always trying to create this kind of vin de soif, fun wine, smashable wine. That was always the goal, but the beauty of doing it with the stems, you get these other levels of fragrance and things like that I don't think you'd necessarily get if you destemmed. And again, say in Sardinia, doing Grenache, doing Cannonau without destemming, so doing Cannonau with the stems, is a nuts idea, an absolute nuts idea. And again, that's one of these things that you learn in wine school. You learn, there's greenness in the stems, so therefore they're putting greenness into the wine, or they're putting astringency into the wine. And actually, it's all about how you treat the stems. If you're not being rough with the wine, actually they can be brilliant. They can break up the cap. They can do so many things. But the important thing for us is they do add this kind of layer of fragrance. And I always, to me, it's this kind of floral thing, and it's also this kind of floral thing that tends to kind of mix in with the tannin a little bit, and I find this from wines from all over the world. You don't have a tannin themselves, don't necessarily have an aroma. They're more like a texture. But I think when you get stems, you do get this aroma that kind of links to the tannin, and I love that. I love that in my wine. And again, the idea with this is we always hope that it would be kind of this tart, bright red cherry, cranberry, that style of fruit, along with this floral aspect. Bit of spice, and some of that comes from the stems as well. But low alcohol, light in colour, light in body. We would tend to drink it cool. Not necessarily from the fridge overnight in the fridge, but I'd put it this way: I'd prefer to drink it overnight in the fridge than hot. so yeah, like for me, it's a half an hour in the fridge, or it's a quick dunk for 5 minutes in an ice bucket or whatever, But yeah, and then the 17, because of the nature of that vintage, hot, dry, etc. We're it is a different kettle of fish. It's a firmer kind of style of wine.
Yeah, I think for me, all of that is certainly showing up in the glass. I mean, I've just been over in Provine, and where I caught up with some of the guys from Gredos. I love it. I'm a bit of a fanboy. So there you see, that's me. An episode I did over in Gredos with Daniel Ramos, and drinking his single vineyard Garnacha in the vineyard itself, and taking out the recorder and recording there. That's it's one of those things that I love to just share. And it's just a super memory, super wines. And I'm happy to meet them to have met them in Pro Wine, to see the other people in the DO as well. And I think in his own way, I'm guessing, there's a sense of a little bit of disruption there as well. And certainly the other guys that you spoke to before, the Dane Landy and Commando G and all of those guys, and it's just really interesting for me to be in this position where I can, from London, as you say, and through what I'm doing, just, try to connect some of the dots in my own mind, and hopefully connect some of the dots. But, I just see that this is such a positive thing, where people are doing something differently because of globalization, because of connectivity. You're able to find a market for it, I think, which I think at the end of the day is the most important thing. It's what makes things like your brother-in-law going back there, makes it viable, isn't it? Because if the wine wasn't going to sell and wasn't going to command a fair price, that wouldn't be viable. Yeah, it totally wouldn't. Which nicely links me forward really to the final question. Is really about looking forward now. Say something about I guess, yeah, we've already heard you saying you've lost money on a euro bottle. So what's that looking like going forward? Are you going to start losing less per bottle? Are you going to start, breaking into profit sometime soon? Are you going to be looking to expand production, get fruit from different places as that sort of ripple effect kind of spreads out in Sardinia? And yeah, I'll just leave it as that sort of open question.
Thank you. It's great because you reminded me to say one of the things I said to myself. I'll definitely say that. Sardinia is a really interesting place. It's a little bit like South Africa in terms of this amazing access to old vines. They exist there, but the access part can sometimes be the hard part to get. And I suppose realistically going forward, the dream would be to be able to access some of that fruit. That's the dream. And then, over time, probably take on some more of our own vineyards, etc., etc. In the kind of present, really, we need to let Gianluca do his study, do that properly. We'll continue doing what we're doing and hopefully make a little bit more wine each time. The 2018 vintage, we're going to have 1,200 bottles. That'll be our biggest vintage. We've turned into a multinational corporation at 1,200 bottles. But that's our biggest thing so far. At 1,200 bottles, will we still lose money? No, we'll be roughly around break even. When I did the business plan at the very beginning, the idea was we would need to get to, I think a cuvee like this, Garnacha guerra, it can never be more than 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, maybe maximum 1,000 bottles. Just the nature of the wine. It needs to be more hands-on. You literally need to have your feet in it. It's that style of wine. So I don't think that could ever grow to be something big. But initially when I did the business plan, we need to get to about 30,000 bottles to kind of pay a couple of salaries, basically. And that would be, say, roughly 5,000 bottles of this, the Garnacha guerra, and then more of a cheaper wine. And I suppose that kind of idea has come from years of me selling, being lucky to be around really fine wines. You know that, you might sell X amount of Barolo, but the thing that's actually going to fund the business is the Langhe Nebbiolo. You know what I mean? And it's the same in Brunello and Rosso di Montalcino, etc., etc. You need to have an entry-level wine to get people onto a kind of bigger wine. So I suppose over time we would love to just experiment and do different cuvées. The big first step for us is to create, build, buy, whatever it is, but we need a winery space that is our own. Currently we're in the corner of a winery, and I mean it's great, it's brilliant to be able to do that, but it doesn't give us the control that we would really like to have. And also its space is kind of at a premium. We couldn't grow in the corner of that winery to 3,000 bottles. That's just not possible for us. So that's an issue as well. But so the big goal is to get a winery. And with the type of business that it is, it's agriculture, there's huge risk in buying vineyards, planting vineyards. There's major risk in that. So as a kind of young business, you don't want to saddle yourself with risk. So at least if you have a property, you can sell on a property. It's likely that you'll be able to sell on a property roughly for the amount that you've bought it, particularly if you've done some work to it. So from a business perspective, that would be the first step. And then once that happens and we would put in the equipment, etc., etc., the thing is to really focus on sourcing fruit. That's the big focus. And again, in Sardinia, you have so many people who are, shall we say, weekend farmers. They work a job in a city Monday to Friday. They come back, they do their treatment Saturday, Sunday. There's potential for us, I think, to go to those people and say, hey folks, I know you still want to make your own wine, but if we work the land for you, could we take, half the fruit? So take the hassle from you, but allow us to have amazing fruit and access to amazing fruit. So I think that's the plan longer term. And again, the link always comes to South Africa in my mind, because they do have these amazing old vine vineyards that farmers are farming as opposed to the producers are farming them. So they are buying the fruit. That's a similar thing that's happening in California. I mean, some of the best sites are owned by a farmer and people are just buying fruit from them. So I think that would be the that's the kind of shorter term goal. But really we just want to experiment a bit more. It's fun, like it's amazing fun to just to on a random day someone goes, oh, and do you want a couple of 100 kilos of Vermentino? Absolutely we do. So in 2018 we picked up 200 kilos of Vermentino and we made a 7-day skin contact wine. And it's brilliant, you know. I don't think we've made enough of it to bottle any, and we literally did it at home, you know. So I don't think we'd be allowed bottle any. But you know, it was one of those things when you're tasting it, say 6 months later, you're going, oh, God, there's something in this, you know. And the other thing, you know, rosé, there's amazing, you know, Grenache is one of these brilliant grapes where if you pick it early and you get that lovely brightness of acidity, you can make delicious rosé. So there are a couple of things that we've experimented with already in tiny batches that if we had the space we would absolutely love to do. But that skin contact Vermentino, watch this space.
Thank you so much to Mick. It was fantastic meeting you and getting to try the wine together firsthand. I've of course left all of his direct contact details below. If you're enjoying the series so far, it would mean the world to me if you would leave me an iTunes review. This helps more people to learn about the podcast and to listen to series like the one I'm producing now. And of course, if you're not already, I would love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. Next time is unfortunately the final part of this special 5-part MW interview series. But we really go out with a bang as I feature Richard Hemming, MW. See you then.